Racist cop attacks, pregnant young black woman, her brother's revenge will leave you speechless. Our ancestors carried a burden too heavy to measure. For centuries, they fought against forces determined to break their bodies, erase their names, and silence their voices. Shackled, beaten, humiliated, yet they stood firm, planting seeds of resistance so their children might one day walk in freedom. That fight, their fight, lives on. It echoes in every black soul today. Every glance, every question, every moment of judgment. It's the shadow of that burden, the weight of their sacrifice. This story is one you need to hear, not because it's unique, but because it's painfully common. Over decades, nearly every black person has experienced racism in some form, whether it's subtle, like a passing comment, or overt, like what you're about to witness. The reality is stark. Being judged for the color of your skin is a trauma too many of us carry. It's a pain inherited through generations, a reminder that the fight isn't over. Meet Talia Thompson, a 28-year-old woman living a quiet life in a small southern town. She's a sister, a daughter, and soon a mother. For Talia, her days are filled with routine, hope, and anticipation for the life growing inside her. That day was no different. She woke up early, ready to run errands, humming to herself as she thought about the nursery she was decorating. The soft yellow walls were almost done. The crib was set, and the tiny onesies were already folded neatly in drawers. Everything was falling into place. It was a sunny afternoon when she pulled into the grocery store parking lot. The air was warm, the kind of day that makes you slow down and take a deep breath. Talia pushed her cart through the parking lot, her hands resting occasionally on her growing belly, the corners of her lips turning up into a quiet smile. She wasn't thinking about much, just the list of things she still needed to do before her baby arrived. It was an ordinary day, or at least it should have been. As she unloaded her groceries into the trunk of her car, a small ripple of discomfort ran through her. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a police cruiser pull into the lot. At first, it seemed routine, just a cop making rounds. But as the car slowed and then stopped directly behind her, blocking her in, that ripple turned into a wave. Her heart began to race, a reaction she hated but couldn't control. The officer stepped out of the cruiser, his uniform crisp, his face set in an expression that was anything but friendly. He was a middle-aged white man, tall and broad, his presence immediately commanding attention. Talia froze for a moment, her mind scrambling to understand what was happening. She glanced around the parking lot. A few people were nearby, but no one seemed to notice the tension building. He approached her with purpose, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "What are you doing here?" Talia blinked, caught off guard. "I'm loading my car," she said, her voice steady but tinged with confusion. She gestured to the bags in her trunk, trying to keep her tone respectful, calm. Inside, her pulse was pounding. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," he said, his eyes narrowing as they scanned her up and down. "Mind if I see your ID?" Suspicious activity in a grocery store parking lot? Talia's chest tightened. She hesitated, not out of defiance, but out of sheer disbelief. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wallet, pulling out her ID and handing it to him. He took it without a word, studying it like it held the answer to some unspoken question. "Where are you coming from?" he asked, his tone sharp. "The store," she said, pointing to the sliding glass doors behind her. She tried to keep her voice even, but the tremor in it betrayed her growing fear. "Is there something wrong?" He didn't answer immediately, just kept looking at her, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "You sure about that?" he finally said, his voice dripping with suspicion. Talia felt her stomach twist. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. "Yes, officer," she said, her voice firm but polite. "I have my receipt if you need to see it." Her attempt to de-escalate the situation seemed to backfire. His demeanor shifted, growing more aggressive. He started asking more questions, each one more invasive than the last. Why was she in this area? Where did she live? Did she have anyone who could verify her story? The questions weren't about her actions. They were about her existence. As she answered, her voice wavered under the weight of his scrutiny. She felt trapped, like prey under the gaze of a predator. Her hands instinctively rested on her belly, as if trying to shield her unborn child from the hostility radiating from this man. And then it happened. A moment of aggression so sudden and senseless that Talia didn't have time to react. The officer stepped closer, his face twisted in anger. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, his hand gripping her arm with enough force to make her cry out. And before she could even process what was happening, he shoved her backward. Talia stumbled, her feet failing to find solid ground. She fell hard onto the pavement, her arms instinctively cradling her belly as she hit the ground. Pain shot through her body, but the fear was worse. The fear for her baby, for herself, for what might happen next. She looked up at him from the ground, her eyes wide with tears, her voice shaking. "Please," she said, her hand trembling as she reached toward him. "I'm pregnant." There was no sign of remorse in his expression, no flicker of humanity. To him, she was nothing more than an obstacle, an annoyance to be dealt with. He muttered something about protocol, his words cold and dismissive before stepping back. Talia lay there for what felt like an eternity, the world around her spinning. She could hear faint murmurs from the few bystanders who had gathered, but no one stepped forward to confront the officer. It was as if everyone was frozen, unsure of what to do or how to help. Finally, an older woman came to her side, helping her sit up. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" the woman asked, her voice kind but trembling with fear. Talia nodded weakly, though she didn't feel okay. She felt broken, humiliated, and terrified. As the officer walked back to his car, leaving her on the ground, she realized something chilling. This wasn't about her actions. It was about her existence. And in that moment, she knew that this story, her story, was far from over. This is why we're here. To share stories like Talia's, to stand together against injustice, and to remind each other that no one should face this fight alone. By subscribing to this channel, you're not just watching a story. You're joining a movement, a community of people who believe in justice, in love, and in building a better world. Together, we can ensure that stories like Talia's aren't just moments of pain. They're catalysts for change. Be a part of this family and let's make a difference together. Stay with us because this story is not just hers. It's ours. Talia sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea she hadn't taken a sip from. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Her mother, Angela, sat across from her, her face a mask of worry and anger she was trying hard to suppress. Malik leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. The tension in the room was palpable. "You're telling me he just pushed you?" Malik finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, simmering with restrained rage. "Like you were nothing?" Talia nodded, staring into her untouched tea. "I didn't even see it coming," she said softly. "1 second, I was answering his questions. The next, I was on the ground. I kept telling him I was pregnant, but he didn't care." Angela placed her hand on Talia's. "You don't have to say any more, baby," she said gently. "You've been through enough." But Malik wasn't ready to let it go. He started pacing the small kitchen, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. "This isn't just some misunderstanding," he said, his voice growing louder with every word. "This is what they do. They treat us like criminals for existing. And now they've done it to my sister, my pregnant sister." Angela looked up at him sharply. "Lower your voice, Malik. She doesn't need this right now." "What she doesn't need," Malik shot back, "is for us to sit here and act like this is just something we have to accept. This isn't normal, Ma. It shouldn't be normal." Talia's voice cut through their argument, soft but firm. "He looked at me like I wasn't human," she said, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to let fall. "Like I didn't matter. And it's not just me. It's all of us. It's been happening for generations." Angela leaned back in her chair, her shoulders slumping. She had lived through enough to know the truth of her daughter's words. She had grown up hearing stories of lynchings, of beatings, of black men and women vanishing without a trace. And while the times had changed, the pain hadn't. It had only taken new forms. Malik stopped pacing and turned to his sister. "We're not letting this slide," he said, his voice steady now. "Not this time." Angela shook her head. "And what are you going to do, Malik? March down to the station? Demand answers from a system that's designed to protect itself? You know how this works. They'll twist it. They'll blame her. They'll find some excuse to make it all her fault." "So we just do nothing?" Malik asked, his voice rising again. "Let him get away with it? Let him do it to someone else?" "I'm saying we need to be smart," Angela said, her voice heavy with the weight of experience. "We've seen this before. You go up against them, and they'll destroy you." Talia sat quietly, listening to the argument unfold around her. She understood both sides. She understood her mother's fear, rooted in decades of watching the system fail her people over and over again. But she also understood Malik's anger, his desperate need to fight back, to protect their family and their dignity. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in his mind. His sister on the ground, bruised and terrified. It was a sight he couldn't erase, a memory that burned like fire in his chest. He had always been taught to keep his head down, to avoid confrontation, to survive. But now, survival didn't feel like enough. By morning, Malik had made up his mind. He started by documenting everything. He asked Talia to show him the bruises on her arms and took pictures, his hands shaking with anger as he captured the evidence. He wrote down everything Talia remembered about the encounter, the officer's appearance, the questions he'd asked, the way he'd shoved her without provocation. But Malik knew this wasn't enough. He needed more. He needed to make people see what had happened, to force them to pay attention. He went back to the grocery store parking lot, his phone in hand, determined to find witnesses. At first, it felt hopeless. Most people avoided his gaze or claimed they hadn't seen anything. Some offered vague words of sympathy, but refused to get involved. Malik could feel his frustration building with each dead end. But just as he was about to give up, an older white woman approached him. "I saw it," she said quietly, glancing around nervously. "I saw the whole thing." Malik's heart raced. "You saw him push her? My sister?" The woman nodded. "She wasn't doing anything wrong, just putting her groceries away. That man looked angry, like he was looking for trouble." "Would you be willing to say that on record?" Malik asked, holding up his phone. It could really help. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting around the parking lot. "I don't want any trouble," she said, her voice trembling. "You know how these things go." "I do," Malik said, his voice steady. "I know exactly how these things go. That's why I'm asking you to help. Because if we don't stand up, they'll keep doing it. To her, to me, to someone else." The woman looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." Malik recorded her testimony, a mixture of relief and determination washing over him as he listened to her recount the events of that day. He knew it wasn't much, but it was something, a piece of the puzzle he could use to build a case. That evening, Malik sat down at his computer and started piecing everything together. The photos of Talia's bruises, the woman's testimony, his own thoughts and feelings about what had happened. He poured it all into a video, his hands trembling as he hit the record button. "This is my sister," he began, his voice steady despite the fire in his eyes. "She's pregnant, she's kind, she's hard-working, and this is how she was treated, for no reason other than the color of her skin. We can't keep letting this happen. We need justice, not just for Talia, but for every single person who's been silenced, humiliated, or hurt because of what they look like. If you're tired of seeing this, if you're tired of living this, share this video. Speak out. Because staying silent isn't an option anymore." By the next morning, the video had gone viral. Malik's phone buzzed endlessly with notifications as people from all over shared their outrage, their stories, their support. But as the attention grew, so did the stakes. Malik knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle. The video spread faster than Malik could have imagined. Within hours, it was everywhere, shared by friends, strangers, activists, and even a few local news outlets. Comments poured in, each one a mix of outrage, heartbreak, and solidarity. People demanded answers, called for accountability, and, most importantly, offered their support for Talia. For the first time since that horrible day, Talia felt a flicker of hope. She sat on the couch, scrolling through the hundreds of messages pouring in, her eyes misting with tears. Some were from women like her, sharing their own experiences of being judged, mistreated, or worse. Others were from older viewers who expressed deep sadness, saying things like, "I thought we'd left this behind in my generation." But not all the comments were kind. Malik knew the backlash was coming. It always did. Some accused Talia of exaggerating, claiming she must have done something to provoke the officer. Others dismissed the video entirely, chalking it up to just another race card being played. Malik felt his anger rise every time he read one of those comments, but he reminded himself why he'd done this. The truth was too important to let the noise drown it out. By the next day, the pressure on the police department had become impossible to ignore. The video had reached the desks of local officials who were forced to respond publicly. The chief of police released a statement saying they were looking into the matter. But Malik knew what that really meant. Damage control. He'd seen it before, a promise of accountability that would quietly fade into nothing. So, Malik decided to take things a step further. He started attending town meetings, organizing small rallies, and meeting with community leaders. Every time he spoke, he shared Talia's story, making sure no one could forget what had happened. "This isn't just about her," he said at one gathering. "This is about all of us. This is about our mothers, our daughters, our sisters, our grandmothers. This is about a system that thinks it can treat us like we don't matter." The rallies grew larger with each passing day. People from all walks of life began showing up. Black, white, young, old, men, women, all united by a shared sense of outrage. Elders in the community spoke up, their voices trembling with emotion as they recounted stories from their own pasts. "I thought I wouldn't have to see this in my lifetime," one man said, his voice breaking. "But here we are again." Despite the growing support, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that the officer himself remained untouched by it all. No apology, no consequences, no accountability. It wasn't enough for Malik to have the story out there. He wanted the man who had hurt his sister to face the consequences of his actions. One evening, Malik made a decision that even Talia wasn't sure about. He found out where the officer was stationed and decided to confront him, publicly, with cameras rolling. It was a calculated risk, one that could backfire spectacularly, but Malik was determined. He wasn't looking for violence. He wanted the truth. When he arrived at the station, a small group of supporters trailed behind him, holding signs that read, "Justice for Talia and accountability now." The officer, clearly startled by the sight of Malik approaching, stood stiffly as Malik held up his phone and began recording. "I just have one question," Malik said, his voice calm but firm. "Why? Why did you feel the need to shove a pregnant woman to the ground? What did she do that made you think that was okay?" The officer didn't respond at first, his face unreadable. But then, as if to maintain control of the situation, he smirked. "I was doing my job," he said flatly. "She was being uncooperative." Malik's jaw tightened. "Uncooperative," he repeated, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "She answered every one of your questions, she showed you her ID, and still you pushed her. Is that your job? To put your hands on pregnant women?" The crowd around them began to grow louder, murmurs of disapproval rippling through the air. The officer shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing more. Malik held his phone steady, capturing every second. "This is why we don't trust the system," he said, turning to the crowd. "Because men like him are allowed to walk away without consequences." The video of the confrontation quickly went viral, reigniting the outrage and amplifying the calls for justice. Malik's calm but powerful words resonated deeply with viewers, especially those who had lived through the civil rights era. For many older viewers, it was a haunting reminder of the protests they had marched in decades ago, and a sobering realization that the fight was far from over. But then, something unexpected happened. Days after the confrontation, the officer was suspended, pending an internal investigation. It wasn't the full accountability Malik wanted, but it was a start. The pressure was working. Meanwhile, Talia began to speak out as well. At a rally organized in her honor, she took the microphone, her voice trembling but clear. "I'm not just standing here for myself," she said, her hands resting on her pregnant belly. "I'm standing here for my child, for the future, for a world where they don't have to grow up afraid. My ancestors dreamed of that world, and I refuse to let that dream die." Her words electrified the crowd. People cheered, cried, and vowed to keep fighting. And as the movement grew, it became clear that this wasn't just about one woman or one officer. It was about a legacy of resistance, resilience, and hope. For Malik, Talia, and their family, it wasn't the end of the story, but it was a turning point. The officers' suspension sent a message. Their voices mattered. Their fight mattered. And as they stood together, surrounded by their community, they felt the strength of their ancestors guiding them forward. The suspension of the officer sent ripples through the town, but for Malik and Talia, it wasn't enough. They had fought too hard, endured too much to let this moment pass without making it count. Every bruise on Talia's body, every tear she had shed, every sleepless night, Malik spent replaying that moment in his mind. It all had to mean something. The fight was no longer just about them. It was about everyone who had been silenced, dismissed, or told their pain didn't matter. Talia found herself at the center of a movement she never expected. Strangers reached out to her daily, sharing their own stories of injustice, their own brushes with a system that seemed designed to humiliate and destroy. Many of these messages came from older people, those who had lived through the brutal days of segregation and Jim Crow, who had marched for civil rights and faced fire hoses, attack dogs, and fists in their pursuit of equality. One message stuck with her. It was from an 84-year-old woman who had seen the video and felt compelled to write. "When I was your age," the message began, "I was dragged off a bus for sitting where they said I couldn't sit. I fought then because I knew my children deserved better. Seeing you fight now gives me hope that my grandchildren will see the world we all dreamed of." Talia read those words over and over, her heart breaking and swelling at the same time. It was a reminder of the generations that had come before her, who had fought, suffered, and sacrificed so much just to push the world a little closer to justice. And now it was her turn. At the next rally, Talia stood in front of a crowd that had swelled to hundreds, her voice trembling as she spoke into the microphone. "I never wanted this," she began, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never wanted to be here, standing in front of you, telling you about the worst day of my life. But I'm here because it's not just about me. It's about all of us. It's about my child. It's about the future we're trying to build." She paused, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. "I've been angry. I've been scared. I've been so tired I didn't know if I could keep going. But then I think about my ancestors. I think about how they survived the unimaginable, how they stood tall in the face of hatred and said, 'You will not break me.' That strength is in me. And it's in you too." The crowd erupted into applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. Talia placed her hands on her belly and looked out at them. "My baby will be born into a world that isn't perfect, but because of all of you, it will be better. That's why we're here. That's why we fight. Because we can't let them win. Not now. Not ever." The crowd surged with emotion, chants of "We stand with Talia" rising into the evening air. Malik watched from the sidelines, his chest swelling with pride as he saw his sister transform into a beacon of hope. He had started this journey to protect her, but now he realized she was protecting all of them, giving them the courage to stand up, to speak out, to demand more. In the following weeks, the movement gained even more momentum. Malik created an online platform called Voices United, a space for people to share their stories, organize events, and find community. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people joined from all walks of life, all united by a shared goal: justice. The platform became a hub of activity. Elders shared their memories of past struggles, their wisdom guiding the younger generations. Youth activists posted strategies for organizing and creating change. People who had once felt alone in their pain found a family, a community that reminded them they were not and never would be alone. At the next rally, Malik and Talia stood together on stage, the crowd now stretching farther than they could see. Malik took the microphone first, his voice steady but filled with fire. "We're here because we're tired of being ignored. We're tired of being dismissed. We're tired of being afraid. But look around you," he said, gesturing to the sea of faces. "We're not afraid anymore. We're here, and we're not going anywhere." The crowd roared in agreement, their cheers echoing into the night. Malik continued, his voice rising. "Our ancestors fought so we could stand here today. They faced chains, whips, fire, and bullets so we could have a voice. And now it's our responsibility to use that voice, not just for ourselves, but for the generations that come after us. Together, we're stronger than any hate, louder than any lie, and braver than any fear." He passed the microphone to Talia, who took it with shaking hands. Her voice broke as she began, but she pushed through, her words gaining strength with every sentence. "This fight is about love," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "It's about the love we have for our families, our friends, our communities. It's about the love we have for those who came before us and those who will come after us. That love is stronger than their hate, and that love is why we will win." The crowd surged with emotion, chanting, crying, holding each other close. The moment was electric, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there is light. Even in the face of hate, there is hope. As the rally ended, Malik and Talia stayed behind, talking to attendees, hugging strangers, and listening to their stories. The sense of unity was undeniable, a shared belief that they were part of something bigger than themselves. To everyone watching this story, you're part of this too. Racism, injustice, and hate thrive in silence. But together, we can break that silence. Together, we can create a world where no one has to live in fear because of the color of their skin. To everyone watching this story, you're part of this too. Racism, injustice, and hate thrive in silence. But together, we can break that silence. Together, we can create a world where no one has to live in fear because of the color of their skin. If this story moved you, don't just watch. Act. Share this story. Speak up in your community. Join us by subscribing to this channel. When you subscribe, you're not just supporting stories like this. You're joining a family of people committed to justice, love, and change. Together, we can honor the dreams of our ancestors and make a better world a reality. Let's do this together.